I never thought that at the age of 29 I would have my dream home. But now I'm standing in front of him, and my heart is beating like it's trying to break out of my chest. A beautiful two-story colonial-style house with a porch around the perimeter, snow-white columns and windows that seem to wink at me in the rays of the setting sun. It's not just a house, it's a symbol of everything I've achieved, everything I've dreamed of. My name is Robin Mitchell, and I've worked hard to get here. 5 years of working as an investment manager at Sterling and Associates, endless negotiations, reports, deals that made me fall asleep with a laptop on my lap. But now, looking at this house, I understand. It was worth it. I've finally saved up enough money for a substantial down payment. That's it, Derek. I told my husband, squeezing his hand as we stood in the driveway. What do you think? I asked, not hiding my excitement. Derek smiled, his brown eyes narrowing at the corners. It's perfect, baby. You're doing great, he replied, and his voice sounded so warm that I wanted to hug him right here and now. That's one of the things I loved about Derek. He always supported my career and never seemed to be afraid of my success. When I told him that I wanted to buy a house with my own money and put it in my name, he didn't even flinch. You deserve it, he'd said. It's just that I'm saving up for college for our future children. We're a team, right? I remember hugging him tightly that day, thinking how lucky I was to have such an understanding partner. Most of the guys I knew would throw a tantrum because their wife was buying a house. But not Derek. He worked as a high school teacher, and although his salary was nowhere near the same as mine, he never complained or was jealous. The day we moved in, I couldn't stop smiling. The house was everything I dreamed of: 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen with granite countertops, and a backyard perfect for future barbecues and children's birthday parties. I made sure to deposit enough money so that the monthly mortgage payments wouldn't burden us too much. As an investment manager, I understood the importance of living within my means. Do you know what we should do? Derek said as we unpacked the boxes in the kitchen. We should have dinner with my parents this weekend. They'll want to see pictures of the house. That's a great idea, I agreed, setting up our wedding in China. We should also visit my family. That evening, when Derek and I were sitting on our new porch swing, watching the sunset, everything seemed perfect. We talked about our plans for the house, how we will decorate each room, where we will plant a garden in the spring, which bedroom will become a nursery when we start a family. Later, as I lay in bed listening to Derek's steady breathing next to me, I felt completely at peace. I realized my dream of a beautiful house. I had a loving husband, and our future seemed bright and possible. I dozed off, thinking about how perfect everything was. The first dinner with Derek's parents was supposed to be a simple celebration of our new home. Martha and George have always been kind to me, treating me like a daughter ever since Derek and I started dating 5 years ago. They lived in a modest ranch-style house on the other side of town, and Martha made her famous roast for the occasion. We sat down at the table, and I felt like I was part of their family, part of something more than just a home. Martha told stories from Derek's childhood, and George joked that now they had a reason to visit us more often. I laughed, but deep down I knew that this was just the beginning. The beginning of our new life, our new home, our future. So tell us all about the house, Martha exclaimed, handing over the mashed potatoes. Her gray hair was neatly pulled back into her usual meat bun, and her eyes sparkled with excitement. I opened my mouth to reply, but Derek beat me to it. Actually, I wanted to surprise you guys, he said, his voice full of pride. I bought us this amazing house. 4 bedrooms, beautiful backyard. You'll love it when you see it. I almost choked on the water. Derek squeezed my hand under the table, his eyes pleading with me to shut up. I felt my heart tighten, but I forced a smile and said nothing. Oh, Derek. Martha clasped her hands. That's wonderful, isn't it wonderful, George? George beamed at his son. That's my boy. I always knew you were doing well. He turned to me. You found yourself a pretty generous husband, Robin. Not many young people can afford to buy a house like this these days. I nodded automatically, shifting the food around on my plate. The stew that had smelled so delicious a few minutes ago now felt like lead in my stomach. The rest of the meal flew by in a blur of lies. Derek was telling me how he had saved up for the down payment, his parents were praising his financial responsibility, and I was sitting there feeling like I was in some kind of strange alternate reality. The drive home was quiet until we pulled into our driveway. Our driveway, which I spent my money on. What the hell was that? I demanded as soon as we got inside. Derek ran his hands through his dark hair, a nervous habit I'd noticed early in our relationship. I'm sorry, Robin. You know, my father, he's old school. He will never understand that a man living in a house that his wife bought. It would kill him and my reputation. Your reputation. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Please, Robin, he begged. Can we just let people think that I bought a house? It doesn't hurt anyone, and it makes life easier for everyone. I shook my head, thinking how childish it all was. But looking at his pleading face, I didn't have the heart to argue. Okay, I sighed. Whatever makes you happy. A week later, we were sitting in my parents' living room, and history repeated itself. Mom and Dad were there, as well as my younger sister Emma, who came to visit from her apartment in the city center. Emma and I have always been close, despite the fact that we were as different as day and night. If I was practical, who went into finance, then she was freedom, loving, jumping from job to job in search of herself. We bought a house, Derek announced proudly. Well, I really wanted to give Robin the home she deserves. I watched my family's reaction as if I were watching a movie. Mom and Dad beamed, congratulating Derek on his success. But it was Emma's face that caught my attention. She smiled and congratulated us, but I knew my sister too well not to notice the flash of jealousy in her eyes. She always wanted the perfect home, the perfect life. And now I'm living her dream, or at least that's what she thought. Emma sipped her wine, her gaze moving around the room as if she were imagining how she would decorate this house if it were hers. It's amazing, she said, but there was a hint of bitterness in her voice. You always knew what you wanted, Robin. I wanted to answer, to explain that this is not entirely true, that there are years of work and sleepless nights behind this house, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I just smiled and said, "Thanks, Emma." When we were leaving, Emma hugged me goodbye, and I felt her tremble slightly. Are you happy? What is it? She asked softly, so that no one else could hear. Yes, I replied, but at that moment I realized that my happiness was now connected not only with the house, but also with this strange, uncomfortable lie, which seemed to have taken on a life of its own. 2 weeks after the family dinners, I threw a housewarming party. I spent days preparing everything, arranging new furniture, hanging art, and making sure every room looked perfect. The house was filled with the smell of snacks and the sounds of laughter when our friends and family arrived. Let me give you a great tour, Derek announced to the group, puffing out his chest like a proud peacock. Wait until you see what I have chosen for the main bathroom. I almost snorted into my glass. The main bathroom, which he was so proud of. I chose every tile, all the fixtures, and even that trendy rain shower head that he loved so much. But here he was leading our guests from room to room, talking about his vision of the house and how hard he had worked to afford it all. The party was a success, and life settled into a comfortable routine. Derek and I both worked during the day, returned home to our beautiful house in the evening and spent the weekend making it more and more like home. Everything was perfect. Until exactly 6 months after the housewarming party. I was enjoying a quiet Sunday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I opened it and saw Emma standing there. Her mascara was running down her cheeks, and her shoulders were shaking from sobbing. "Emma, what happened?" I pulled her inside, genuinely worried. "My sister is not someone who cries easily. My working hours have been reduced," she gasped, collapsing onto our sofa. "I can barely earn a part-time job now, and my rent." She burst into fresh tears. I sat next to her, stroking her back like I used to when we were kids and she had a nightmare. "How bad is everything?" "I can't afford my apartment anymore, Robin. I need somewhere to stay." She looked at me with those big brown eyes that we both inherited from Mom. "Can I stay here until I figure something out?" I hesitated. "What about Mom and Dad's house?" "They have a spare room." "Their house is on the other side of town," Emma protested, wiping her eyes. "It's going to take me forever to get from there to work." "Your place is perfect. It's close to everything, and you have all these empty bedrooms." "I do not know, Emma. Let me think about it." She nodded reluctantly, and I promised to call her back later. Less than 10 minutes after she left, my phone rang. It was Mom. "Robin, your sister just called me." I was crying, she said without preamble. "You have to let her stay with you. She's a family." I discussed it with Derek over dinner that night. "Emma needs to stay somewhere," I explained, shifting the pasta around my plate. "She has difficult things at work, and she has to stay with us." Derek immediately said, "We have a room, and it's family. It will be fun with her." I looked at him in surprise. Derek has always gotten along well with Emma, but I didn't expect him to be so enthusiastic about a guest. A few days later, Emma moved in. I helped her set up one of the spare bedrooms, the one with the best morning light, which I planned to turn into a home office. She brought with her several boxes and her favorite plaid, which we once bought together at a flea market. "Thank you, Robin," she said, hugging me. "You have no idea how important this is to me." I smiled, but inside I felt a little uneasy. The house that had been my refuge was now becoming something more. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. The first few weeks weren't bad at all. In fact, they were surprisingly pleasant. I would come home after a long day at the investment firm and find dinner on the table, not just takeout or simple pasta, but real homemade food. The house was spotlessly clean, the linen was always ironed, and Emma seemed genuinely happy to help. But then everything started to change. At first it was unnoticeable, so unnoticeable that I wondered if I was imagining it. "Here's your coffee, Derek," Emma said at breakfast, putting a mug of black coffee with a hint of sugar in front of him, "just the way you like it. Robin always makes it too sweet, doesn't he?" Or, folding the laundry, she would say, "I noticed that your shirts were always wrinkled. A little extra care makes such a difference, don't you think?" I tried to ignore it, but the constant comparisons got on my nerves. One evening, after a particularly pointed comment about how she had finally put the kitchen in order, I took her aside. "Emma, can we talk?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "These comments cause me concern." She looked at me with wide-open, innocent eyes. "What kind of comments?" "How to be a better hostess. About how much better the house has become since I moved in." Emma laughed, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh my God, Robin, you're so sensitive." "I'm just kidding. Don't tell me you're jealous of your little sister." But it wasn't just the comments. 2 weeks later, I came home from work to find Emma in the kitchen wearing what could barely be called clothes, a sheer tank top and tiny shorts that left no room for imagination. Derek was sitting at the counter, ostensibly working on a laptop, but his gaze kept coming up. "Emma," I hissed, pulling her into the hallway. "What are you wearing?" "It's hot in here," she protested, but her grin spoke for itself. "Go change your clothes." She rolled her eyes, but obeyed, changing into her usual home clothes. Later that evening, as Derek and I were getting ready for bed, he raised the issue. "Don't you think you were a little rude to Emma?" "What is it?" he asked, climbing into bed. "She's just comfortable with her family." I stared at him. She was practically naked. "You're exaggerating," he shrugged. "Besides, it's her house, too." His words hit me like a slap in the face. When did this happen? When did my house become her home? The next morning, I ran into Emma at breakfast. "Have you started looking for an apartment yet?" I asked directly. Her face immediately wrinkled. "Robin, I'm trying, but I can barely make ends meet." "Everything is so expensive, she doesn't need to move," Derek interrupted without looking up from his phone. "We have a lot of space, and it's nice that she's here. The three of us work well together." I looked from my husband to my sister. He casually defended her presence in my house, while she sat with a barely perceptible smile playing at the corners of her lips. A chill ran down my spine. "The three of us?" I repeated, but neither of them answered. Instead, Emma stood up, picked up her plate, and headed to the sink, humming to herself. Derek continued flipping through his phone as if nothing had happened. I stood there, feeling something inside me start to crack. My house, my life, my husband, it all suddenly seemed alien. And I didn't know what to do about it. The deal with Anderson was huge, potentially the biggest investment contract of my career, and when my boss told me I needed to fly to Phoenix to meet them in person, I knew it was important to get this done. "I'm going away for 3 days," I told Derek and Emma over dinner the night before my flight, explaining that negotiations might take some time. The meetings in Phoenix went better than I could have imagined. Mr. Anderson was impressed with my presentation and agreed to all our terms without the usual bickering that I expected, and by the end of the second day we had already signed the papers. "You have a great future ahead of you, Mrs. Mitchell," he said as we shook hands. "Sterling and Associates is lucky to have you." I called the airline and managed to get a seat on an earlier flight so that I could return home earlier than planned, because I knew that Derek would be proud of this deal, which could bring me a significant bonus, perhaps enough to pay off most of the mortgage early. A taxi dropped me off at our house around 8 in the evening. The light was on upstairs, and I saw Derek's car in the driveway. I smiled, thinking about surprising them with the good news, and quietly unlocked the front door. My heels clicked softly on the wooden floor, and I noticed 2 wine glasses on the coffee table, and what looked like Emma's blouse was draped over the railing. My stomach clenched as I climbed the stairs, hearing faint music coming from our bedroom, and soft voices. I pushed the door open, and time seemed to stop. The scene that opened up in front of me was etched into my brain: Derek and Emma in our bed, tangled in the sheets I chose when we first moved in. They didn't notice me at first, they were too busy with each other, but then Emma saw me and smiled, actually smiled. "Robin," Derek began, trying to cover himself, but I didn't let him finish. "I can't explain it," Emma said, stretching lazily and standing up, not bothering to cover herself. "Oh, don't worry, Derek," she added, starting to pick up her clothes from the floor. "She should have found out eventually." I stood frozen in the doorway, my hands shaking. "How long?" My voice sounded strangely distant. "A few weeks," Emma replied casually, pulling on her clothes. "We're in love, aren't we, Derek?" Derek looked like he was about to throw up. "Oh, and there's something else," Emma added, her hand sliding to her stomach. "I'm pregnant. I found out a few days ago." Derek's head snapped up, and his face paled, which was obviously news to him, too. "Get out," I whispered, and then louder, "Both of you, get out of my house." Emma laughed, actually laughed. "Your house?" "Oh, honey, I think you're confused." She turned to me with a wicked smile. "This is Derek's house. He bought it, remember? You have an hour to pack up and leave." I was standing there looking at my sister when the reality of the situation hit me. She had been believing a lie all along. She thought she was stealing a rich man and his house. She had no idea that everything, every single thing around us, was mine. I couldn't help but laugh. The sound came from somewhere deep inside me, slightly hysterical, but unstoppable. Emma's face became confused. What's so funny? You're being kicked out of the house, and you're laughing? I wiped the tears from my eyes, still giggling, though my laughter was more bitter than joyful. Oh, Emma, dear, delusional Emma, I began, looking at her ironically, this house, the one you think you're going to live in with my cheating husband, is mine. Every brick, every tile, every piece of furniture, I bought it all. Emma spat, but I could see uncertainty creeping into her eyes, as if the ground beneath her feet was slowly slipping away. The Mercedes that Derek drives is also mine, I continued. I bought it last year because he said his old car wasn't professional enough for a teacher. I turned to Derek, waiting for him to confirm my words, but he seemed to cringe under Emma's fierce gaze. It's true, he muttered, staring at the floor. Everything belongs to Robin. I just told everyone that I bought it because I wanted to look successful. The color drained from Emma's face, and she grabbed one of our decorative pillows, the ones I'd spent hours picking out at the store, and started hitting Derek with it. You're a liar. You pathetic, worthless liar, she screamed, and her voice was full of rage and frustration. Both of you, stop it, my voice cut through the air, drowning out Emma's screams and Derek's attempts to defend himself. I'm done with this circus. You have an hour to pack your things and get out of my house. Derek started to say something, but I cut him off abruptly. Don't worry about the divorce papers. I'll send them to your parents' house. Emma's behavior changed instantly. The rage disappeared, replaced by the manipulative sweetness I was so used to. Robin, you can't kick me out. I'm your sister, your pregnant sister. Where should I go? Her voice was shaking, but I knew it was just a game. It's not my problem, I replied coldly, looking at my watch. 55 minutes left. If you don't leave by then, I'll call the police. I turned around and went downstairs to the kitchen, leaving them to pack their things. My hands were steady as I made myself a coffee using the fancy coffee machine I bought last Christmas. I was sitting at the kitchen island, slowly sipping coffee, listening to the chaos upstairs. 10 minutes later, the phone rang. Mom's name appeared on the screen. How dare you? She screamed before I could say hello. Are you kicking your pregnant sister out on the street? What kind of monster? She seduced my husband, I said flatly. They'd been having an affair for several weeks now, and when I caught them, she tried to kick me out of my own house. There was a short silence, and then Mom said, well, maybe you should give them the house. You're successful, you can afford to rent an apartment. Emma is pregnant now, she needs stability. It would be a good thing to give them the house. I sat there, stunned by her words. I don't want this conversation, I said, my voice as cold as ice. Actually, I don't want to talk to you at all right now. I hung up before she could answer and stared at my reflection in the dark window. I barely recognized myself, but maybe that was a good thing. Maybe it's time to become someone new, someone stronger. An hour passed, both quickly and painfully slowly. Doors slammed, drawers creaked, and Emma's occasional sobs echoed through the house, I assumed. I was sitting in the kitchen listening to this chaos, and I realized that this was the end of one chapter and the beginning of something new. No matter what happened next, I knew one thing, would no longer let anyone play with me or my life. Finally, they appeared at the bottom of the stairs, each with bags in their hands. Emma's mascara was smeared across her face, but her eyes were steady as she looked at me. You're going to regret this, she spat venomously. Do you think you're so perfect with your big house and cool job? You'll end up alone and unhappy. I didn't even bother to answer. I had nothing more to say. I watched from the window as they loaded their bags into Emma's wrecked Corolla and drove away. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, like the stone I'd been dragging all these weeks had finally fallen. I immediately turned off my phone, knowing that calls, text messages, and family drama were about to begin. I couldn't handle any of this right now. When morning came, I turned on my phone again, wincing at the flood of notifications. 37 missed calls, 62 text messages, voice messages from both sets of parents, from Emma, from Derek. I ignored them all and dialed my lawyer's number instead. Barbara, this is Robin Mitchell. I need to file for divorce. Barbara, bless her soul, didn't ask for details. Come to the office at 11 o'clock, we'll start. I called work, explaining that I needed time off. My boss, realizing that the deal with Anderson had made me his favorite, agreed without question. I spent 2 hours with Barbara discussing the details of filing for divorce, and then I went home. I was fumbling with the keys at the front door when I heard voices behind me. I turned around and saw my parents standing in the driveway. Mom and Dad looked furious. Martha was crying, and George's face was red with anger. How dare you kick them out? Mom demanded when they followed me into the house. Your sister, your husband, you can't just kick a man out of his own house. George added, the house he bought. I'm done, I said, heading to my home office. Let me show you something interesting. I pulled out the folder with the documents for the house that I kept there and returned to the living room. Actually, I began, spreading out the papers on the coffee table. Let me show you something. They gathered around when I pointed at the documents. Look at the buyer's name. Look at where the initial payment came from. Look who's in the mortgage. I watched their faces when it dawned on them that this house, every penny, was mine. The car that Derek drives is also mine. He didn't pay anything for it, but as he said. Martha stammered. He lied. Yes, I said. He told everyone that he bought the house because he was too insecure to admit that his wife was the breadwinner. He lived off my success, pretending it was his own. That lying little ass, exploded George, his face turning even redder. I raised him better than that. After the relatives left, Mom and Dad stayed late. The documents were still spread out on my coffee table, irrefutable proof of my ownership, but for some reason it didn't matter to them. Robin, you need to be reasonable, Dad said, using his rational parental voice, which I remembered from childhood arguments. You can't just kick them out on the street. Emma is pregnant, and Derek. Well, he's still your husband. I looked at them, feeling anger building inside me. Are you serious? I asked, my voice shaking with tension. Do you want me to forgive them? So that I can let them live in my house after they betrayed me? Mom sighed, her eyes filled with tears. We just want you to think about the consequences. You can't just cut them off from your life like they don't mean anything. They've already cut themselves off, I replied, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. I will not live in a house that has become a symbol of their betrayal. I deserve more. They left, leaving me alone in the silence of my house. I stood there, looking at the documents spread out on the table, and realized that this was just the beginning. The beginning of a new life in which I will no longer allow anyone to play with me or my life. They're starting a family, I laughed bitterly. Do you mean the betrayal of my husband and my sister? Mom looked at me sharply, her eyes sparkling with indignation. Baby, don't be cruel. This is your niece or nephew you're talking about. Think about the child's future. I stood up, my patience finally wearing thin. Let me get this straight. Is my sister sleeping with my husband, trying to steal my house, and should I just give up everything I've worked for? You've always been selfish, Mom said, her voice trembling. I've always thought only of myself. When you were little, you never shared your toys with Emma. It's not about the toys, Mom, I replied, feeling anger rise in me. This is my life, my home, my marriage. They are destroyed. If you don't help your sister, Dad intervened, his voice firm but tired, we'll have no choice but to end our relationship with you. I went to the front door and opened it. Get out. They left, leaving Mom's last words ringing in my ears. You're going to regret this. Your own family. I slammed the door so hard that the windows rattled. The divorce process went surprisingly quickly, despite Emma's constant pressure. I learned from mutual friends that Derek had never tried to claim any property. He knew better. He saw all the documents and knew that all the assets were registered in my name. Fighting would just be a waste of money, which he didn't have, and attorney's fees, which he couldn't afford. I threw myself into my work, taking on more clients, making bigger deals. The contract with Anderson was just the beginning. I've redone the house, erasing all traces of them. New furniture, new paint, new everything. The master bedroom, where I found them, became my home office. I couldn't sleep there anyway. Through social media, before I blocked them all, I watched their story unfold like a bad soap opera. They got married in a modest ceremony at my parents' house. Emma posted endless updates about her pregnancy, playing the role of a future radiant mother. She never missed an opportunity to portray herself as a victim, leaving comments about toxic family members and selfish sisters who abandoned their pregnant siblings. A recent update shared by a colleague who still subscribed to her showed that she and Derek had squeezed into my old childhood bedroom at our parents' house. The caption read, "Making the most of things while violent people live in luxury. But we have love, and that's the main thing." I closed the tab without reading the comments. Let them play happy family in someone else's bedroom. Let my parents babysit them and pretend their precious Emma didn't do anything wrong. Let them all live in their bubble of delusion. I'm all right now. The house is peacefully filled with only my things, my choices, my life. Sometimes silence is better than toxic company. And sometimes the family you were born into is not the family you need to keep. I was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, and for the first time in a long time I felt like I was breathing deeply. The house was quiet, but there was freedom in that silence. I knew there was a new chapter ahead of me, and this time I would write it myself.